Okay, so our task, as you can see here, is to solve for the magnitude and direction of the resultant vector. Now take note, this is already a new topic because previously we are just dealing with geometric approach. But this time around, when we are dealing with solving for the magnitude and direction, this is now an analytical method of solving for your vectors. So this is an analytic method already. So you need to take note here, class, that your vector P, diba? Our given vectors are P and N. So each of these vectors has individual components, which we call P of X and P of Y. Meaning to say those are just the X component of your vector P and the Y component of your vector P. In the same manner, your vector N has X component as well as Y component. Now take note, what we are doing here is we add these two vectors P and N to result to our resultant vector R. So I'm just going to remove the highlights kasi it's making the text messy. Okay, so the first step that you are going to do in terms of solving for the magnitude as well as the direction of your resultant vector is to solve for both the x and y components of the individual vectors. It means to say you will plot individual vectors first. If you started with vector p, you must have a separate illustration of your vector p, and from there you resolve the x and y components. Okay, so yeah, I can't erase it unfortunately. So this is the plot of your vector p here. As you can see, it's measured 30 degrees. This is south, this is west, so 30 degrees west of south, right? So 30 degrees, and then our goal here is to solve for the x component and the y component of this first vector. Now, I mentioned in the class that whenever we find for the x component, that is just equal to, automatically, if it's the x component, the function is cosine of your angle. So I'm hoping by now you recall the discussion on the unit circle, why that becomes cosine of the theta. And then we just take the absolute value of your vector, meaning the magnitude of your vector multiplied by the cosine of the angle theta. That is why for your x component here, the one that I am highlighting, you are seeing that to find for the x component of vector p, you just take this portion, which is your magnitude, multiplied by the cosine of angle theta. Okay, now in this case, your angle theta is, guess what? From the illustration, your angle theta is clearly 30 degrees. I'm just going to erase that one. So basically, your angle theta is 30 degrees, as you can see here. Pero class, as I've mentioned, I guess from the other section, you could actually do the standard measure of an angle. In this case, that is from your positive x. This is your positive x, right? So gikan sa mong positive x padulong diri kining nga blue ba? Kana siya nga measurement kining small nga blue, no? That is equivalent to 240 degrees. So I'm hoping you agree with me nga or makita ninyo why 240 degrees na siya nga measurement taman diri ah. So if you're going to use the cosine of 240, you don't have any problem with that. Okay, so basically this statement here that you are seeing is just the same if you will use this one, magnitude of p, but instead of using cosine of 240, you will just write cosine of whatever this angle is, and that is 30 degrees. But you have to be wary, class, bantayan nimo and consider the fact that, di ba, kini magong imong gisulat na cosine 30 degree, you have the tendency to just write, I don't know if you remember, but the cosine of 30 is basically, unsa man ang cosine sa imong 30? Unsa man na siya? Sige daw, i-recall daw ninyo. Diba? That is the square root of 3 over 2. Kadumdum ba mo, anak? Cosine of 30. Square root of 3 over 2. Sige, ato sa na-erase. Okay. Now, if you notice, the one in blue here is measured from this portion up until here is actually your 240 degrees. So you can actually write it at the cosine of 240 degrees. However, if you also note, class, this angle here is 30 degrees. Now, from what you recalled in our class, the symmetry of that, or the reflection of that on the first quadrant, the one that I am highlighting here through the broken lines, is just 60 degrees. Nakita ni madari, 60 degrees. So, although this is 240 ang standard measure niya, actually, ang value ana niya, class, para di mag-calculator is, unsay value gani sa atong 60. Hoping you can still remember from the unit circle. So, the value of your 60 atong unit circle kay 1/2 square root of 3 over 2, because the 60 degrees is just the reverse of the 30 degrees here in the first quadrant. I'm hoping you still remember that one. This is your 30 degrees. Now, anyway, this one here, I have no problem if you use 240 degrees because this angle is what we call a standard measure starting from the positive x. But I want you to be wise because of the fact that that 240 degrees, or merely this 30 degrees angle that you are seeing here, ang iyahang reflection ana niya is kini. Kini akong gi-highlight. So if that is the case, then but pasabot kanang 240 degrees nimo, class, parihara na siya value sa imuhang 60 degrees diri Okay? Kay kini man na siya nga angle. So ang iyang opposite ana niya diri kini. So parihara value na sa iyang ordered pairs, 1/2 og square root of 3 over 2. So mauna siya karon nga ang imong cosine of 240 di na ka mag-rely og calculator ana niya. So you just have to unsa man take the, of course, if this is your 30, you just have to take the reflection of that, and since cosine man, kanang first na component, which in this case is 1/2. Okay, 1/2. But take note, akong butang agyan or red ha, it should bear a negative sign because although 1/2 ang value sa iyang reflection diri, the exact position of this angle here is actually on the quadrant 3, which bears negative x and negative y. So it should bear a negative sign. So 50 is the magnitude of your angle multiplied by the cosine of 240, or just the cosine of 60 degrees. I'm hoping it is making sense nganong na 60 degrees siya. Kaya kung 30 degrees na siya, akong isulat la sa dali sa pikas para dili mo mawala. Sige, kanang imong nakita nga cosine of 30 degrees nimo sa imong third quadrant, pariharan na silag makuha sa no. Ako sang erase di ay, kaya pa di mo ma-confuse. Let's first start with the standard measure. So, the cosine of the standard measure nimo is your 240 degrees. Nakuha nimo kanang blue, kini siya ba? Apart. This 240 degrees. Now, that is just equal na siya, class, sa imo ang cosine of, unsa man imo nakita? Cosine of 60 degrees nimo. Nganong may imong nganong imong kag equal na siya? Take note, this is your 30 degrees. So as we establish in the pattern sa atong unit circle, if this is 30 degrees, pareha na nag-value ang imong makuha sa iyang reflection diri, which is the 60 degrees on the quadrant 1. This is your quadrant 1, right? So, mauna nga, equal na siya sa cosine 60. Pero, tangan ako glaeng diri. But, different lang yun siya sign. So, diri na din to nagamit inyo ang mga unit circle na discussion. So, if you find this confusing diri nga part, I am inviting you to recheck again ang pattern sa imong unit circle, and maybe test yourself of the pattern sa unit circle para mag-make sense sa inyo. Okay, so I'm just put different signs. I'm hoping I can remove this one. Right, so it's not working. I guess I'll find a whole partial. Nope. So it's really not working in that way. But anyway, so that means to say you are now able to solve for the x component of your vector p, which in this case is negative 25 newtons. Now, I have a highlight here. Alternative way of solving is to use SOHCAHTOA in each of the vector component, but we will deal with this discussion because this is quite confusing on the face-to-face class. Now, for the y component, we are still dealing with the same vector, the vector p. Now, if you are interested with getting the y component, as I've mentioned from the class previously, as long as our theta, kini atong condition class, is a standard position angle, standard measure or standard position man siya, no, of measurement sa imong angle, sa imong imong value sa imong theta, meaning to say you started measuring this from your positive x. This is your positive x. This is your sum angle theta. As long as ingon ana imong pag-measure class, your y component, whatever vector that may be, is just a function of the sign gyud siya. Sign of the angle and then the magnitude of your vector. That is why in the case of vector p, you are looking for p sub y that is just equal to the magnitude of your vector, in this case magnitude of p, the sign of the angle theta. Okay? So after plugging in the values, the magnitude of vector p is just 50 newtons, and then the sine of theta is 240. So by now, I am hoping na mas mag-make sense gyapon ni inyo. Sir, nganong 240? Let me just change the color. So why 240? Because simply, our theta there is the standard position of measurement or standard measure sa imong angle starting from positive x up until the vector itself. Here, that's 240 degrees. But then again, since 240 is quite kanang daunting number sa ato, so we just have to take note that in this vector, starting from your south, going west na 30 degrees, the reflection again is just 60 degrees on quadrant 1. Therefore, the values at this point is similar to the values diri sa taas. Sige, ako na lang siyang i-explicit. Sulat na lang ako yung mga values diri. So, you should expect that the values will just be similar to this one. So, kini lang yun sa quadrant 1 ang imong timan-ano kay since this is already a reflection, it will just have negative 1/2 kasi negative ang x dira og square root of 3 over 2. Kana siya. So, I'm hoping you are recalling now your discussion sa unit circle. So, in this case, this sine of 240, that is just equal to the value of the sine 60, and then the sine is on the y component, so this one here is the value of your sine angle, which is square root of 3 over 2, as you can see here. Now, you just do some manipulation there, so you will be getting 50 over 2, negative 50 over 2 square root of 3, or the y component here is equal to negative 25 square root of 3 newtons. Okay, so if you want to review this section of the lecture, then feel free to pause the video and replay it before proceeding to the second section.